My name is Dr. Neil Minkoff, and I want to thank everybody for participating, not just in this panel or coming to this panel, but being part of the Data Economics Festival. There's more information available on lydian.com/festival, and lots more coming up after our session today, although I'm biased. I'm going to think this is the highlight of the day, but I'm biased. And there's probably another dozen or so sessions later today and tomorrow. And the fun stuff, including the cocktail mixology session tonight, and then the golf clinic and the music sing-along tomorrow night. So still a lot going on. But today, right now, I'd like to welcome the members of our panel, and I'll be weighing in as well. And we're going to be talking about high-cost therapies, right? How the data is being used in our market to drive market access and to help to answer questions about medications and how they'll come to market. You know, this has been an interesting time, but it presents new challenges. So as these new therapies are starting to come to market, we're seeing a lot of challenges in understanding who the patient population is, how we're going to be interacting with that patient population. What is it that the payers need to know? What do the clinicians need to know, the prescribers, to be able to get access to this and make people interested in engaging? So we're going to be talking to a number of our experts here about different ways that data is helping to drive their decision making or influence their customers' decision making. So I would like to take a minute. My name is Neil Minkoff. I am a former PCP and emergency room physician in the Boston area, and I've been doing work, medical director type work, for longer than I would care to usually admit, but stints at Partners Healthcare, Harvard Pilgrim, Catamaran, and have spent a fair amount of time in the market access space. And I'm joined by a number of distinguished panelists today, far more distinguished than I am. And I'll start with MACKAY. MACKAY, would you like to introduce yourself? You are currently, I believe, president of Ember Global Advisors.
Yeah, I actually think I'm least distinguished on the panel, but I appreciate you building me up early. So yeah, I'm MACKAY JIMESON. My background's a mix of business politics and health policy communications. I started out working for Governor Jeb Bush in Florida for about 4 years and worked on some other campaigns along the way, and then joined Pfizer, where I had a career for a little over 10 years. My last role, I was head of corporate affairs for Pfizer's internal medicine business, which was roughly a $9 billion business globally. And my focus was everything from policy, communications, government relations, corporate responsibility, et cetera, for that specific business. And last year, I started a firm called Ember Global Advisors that's really helped focus on helping life science health tech companies navigate and avoid the common pitfalls that many of us faced in this hyper-political environment. So we have a network of experts that can help on everything from political issues, regulatory issues, economic access, et cetera, really focused on solving problems for our clients.
Great. And then I guess I'll go to Mark next. Mark VINEIS is joining us, and he's a VP at Novartis and a longtime friend and colleague. And can you say a few words about your role and some of the roles that led to it?
Sure. Thanks, Neil. Happy to be here. I head up managed markets for Novartis Pharma. Have been in the pharmaceutical industry for just about all of my career. I did a 2-year stint in what I would refer to as a radical curiosity, where I ran specialty pharmacy for Cardinal Health. But I've been at Cardinal Health, and then before that, Genentech for a number of years, all in market access. GSK, SmithKline Beecham, AstraZeneca. So I've sort of been working through the list of large pharma over the last 25 plus years, and yeah, happy to be here and looking forward to the conversation.
Thanks very much. And my friend and colleague Doug Brown is joining us, who's a senior vice president at COAS now and has a background in policy and public policy, I believe.
Yeah, thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you guys today. I started my career behind the bench working at CBS for a long time, and um, eventually moved over to Magellan Government, where I spent 18 years with the Magellan RX and their government division. I left Magellan last summer and to join Neil here at COAS as the Chief Strategy Officer for Magellan Government. Along the way at Magellan, I was the Vice President of Account Management and also Value-Based Solutions. Really, it's trade relation, manufacturer trade relations. We spent 15 years working with manufacturers, preferred drug list design, worked with more than half the states in the country on their preferred drug lists, and got to know a lot of manufacturers in this space very well. One of the things that I did just prior to leaving Magellan, in the 5 years prior to leaving Magellan, was worked on it with another group to bring an open source outcomes-based contract template to the Medicaid space. And 9 states today have that CMS approved template available. So there's 9 states out there that are doing value-based contracts or have the potential to do value-based contracting using that template that I helped create. And so I'm really looking forward to the discussion today. I know that this is around data and real world access and real world data and what some of those challenges are. So I'm looking forward to the discussion here.
So I'd like to kind of start at a very high level, and I'll open this up to the group unless nobody answers, and then I'll start picking on people. Fair warning. I feel like there's been a tremendous change in the way we as an industry, and I think that the folks here, the 4 of us, have approached this now from, payer point of view, specialty pharmacy, manufacturer, like lots of different aspects here, lots of different perspectives. I feel like there's been this radical change in the way we use data to understand medications or therapies for our patients. And certainly, I feel like when I started doing this over 20 years ago, it was all about what did the phase 3 placebo-controlled trial show as an outcome, and everything was based on that. And that doesn't feel like what we're doing anymore. I was wondering if folks could talk about, just at a high level, before we dive in, how the market is changing and how our needs for data are changing because of that.
So I'll start. I have mixed feelings on this subject, to be honest with you. I agree. I think there's been pockets where there's been pretty rapid improvement, and I think there's pockets where we're at almost a total stalemate. And I say that I was on the phone until 11 o'clock last night with about 40 or so moms of children who have an ultra rare disease. And the system's literally failing them. I'll keep company names and whatnot out of it, but the company's given up on the trial effectively. These kids are going to be pushed off compassionate use, and nobody knows what to do about it. And the reality is, we need a more flexible system still to this day, especially as we talk about ultra rare diseases, or not even ultra rare diseases, just the way the science is going. We're entering a place that, I think our systems are still too antiquated to kind of keep up with. And I know we'll touch into some of these issues later, but I also agree with you. Like, I do think data has improved the way that we help identify, understand, and treat patients. I've especially seen a lot of progress in smaller pockets. For example, I work with a company on clinical trial recruitment, and what we're doing with AEI and matching patients with the right clinical trial to more rapidly recruit and improve that has been phenomenal. I've also worked with a company that has found ways to create competition between hospitals to help save patients money. I think those have been, positives, but I think at the end of the day, we still need to see greater flexibility from both government and industry, I think, to really see meaningful change in the system.
Yeah, I will. I'll agree with MACKAY. I'm a little bit jaded, right? Because we're the products that my team supports, we're very much embedded in the dynamic of rebate guarantees, right? That the PBM industry is in. I mean, it's a reality of their business model, right? there's employee benefits consultants. They shop business on behalf of their employer and health plan clients. Magnitude of rebate over a 3-year period where the plans are forced to commit to levels of increasing rebates, then puts them in a position where they have to go out and get them. Almost it's analogous to a sales objective, right? And then I think that from a data perspective or a real world evidence perspective, it can be hard to get even the strongest messages through above the sort of the stock price business urgency that at least within the pharmacy benefit that these plans feel. Now, there's always exceptions where a product, where the real world evidence is so compelling, right? And we have some examples where use of the product actually reduces total cost of care, that the product actually pays for itself. And when the plan, when you collaborate with the plan in an outcomes-based agreement, usually they're not super meaningful rebate agreements, but where they can be meaningful is where the plan's taking a look at its own data, and then those data are analyzed, and then it gets published, and then it opens the door for a real conversation on what exactly happened in that patient population. So I think from that perspective, there's an opportunity to have a different conversation. And then when guidelines pick up and when clinical usage picks up, then the real world evidence can rise to the top. But that's at the point where it's almost at that point you're working with a societal shift on how a disease is treated. And I think that's all within sort of current specialty biologic therapy. In cell and gene, there's clearly been an ask and a concern on, one, if we're going to spend this amount of money in one, at one time with one dose or a very small number of treatments, is this a cure? Is it a durable cure? And then, how do you finance that durable cure? Because typically, right, a disease is financed over decades or over a long period of time. And you could be saving the system money, but you're costing one employer all of that at one go. And it's incredibly disruptive, particularly to the self-insured market. So I think in these ultra high cost curative therapies, there is a case for tracking real world evidence or data real time, and you're seeing other companies come out with similar therapies, and do you start to see stacked therapies, right? And then that becomes a concern. So I think it's not mature. The system isn't, the incentive structure isn't really aligned to integrate real world evidence into decision making. It still is a little bit zero sum game, I think. And there are exceptions, and sometimes high quality data, high quality outcomes, we do see it break through and influence decisions. But I would say, in my experience, that's the exception. And it's only after there's some overwhelming clinical movement in a direction that the plan almost has to get on board with. So then it's, was it the chicken or the egg? Was it the evidence, or is it the fact that clinical behavior changed nationally and the plan, P&T really had no choice but to get on board? And I don't have an answer for that, but you have to have the data regardless.
So you touched on a lot of things that I'm definitely going to come back to, a few things in terms of how that data ends up maybe making a change or when it doesn't. And I want to come back to a few things you said there, but I want to bring Doug in here and ask, so much time that you've spent working with Medicaid or other public programs, there's just somewhat different dynamic than what Mark is describing in terms of guarantees to employers or health plans and things like that. Could you comment on it or see if you could outline any things that are different from the Medicaid point of view or the public payer point of view as opposed to the commercial PBM plan point of view?
I mean, the financial elements are still the same for Medicaid and public payers. Drugs are the high cost breakthrough therapies, gene therapies, CAR T. They're still very, very expensive. State budgets are tight. COVID has exacerbated that. And states are still looking to make sure that while within the Medicaid program, the law requires them to cover all drugs, they want to make sure that they're covering it for the right patients at the right time. And what we end up with is prior authorization processes that can kind of slow that process down sometimes, even to the point where physicians give up on certain products because of of that process. The hope in the market, and states and CMS have been working hard over the last couple of years to try to change the dynamics for payers to move the market from volume-based discounts to value-based arrangements. I hope I get a chance in a little while, Neil, to talk about the BBC final rule that came out and some of the changes.
Yeah, I do want to get to that.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that a little bit. But I think the position has been, CMS has been pushing this, states have been pushing this. I think for states, there's a ton of new drugs that have come to the market with very limited clinical evidence to show that they work. They're struggling with, how do we pay for this when we don't even know it's going to work, or it's a very, very small patient population? And if I'm paying $400,000, $800,000, $1 million, and I don't know, based on the data that this breakthrough therapy had, if it's durable, if it's preventive, how am I going to cover this? And while one patient might get a $2 million therapy, the pipeline has got, there's 50 drugs in the pipeline over the next 10 years that could come in the market, and it really expands. And I think financially, Medicaid is in a tough position to cover that, but that's not dissimilar to many self-insured health plans are also looking at this. And you worry about getting to the end, and you have these carve outs where folks are potentially going to be, therapies are going to be carved out of the benefit and not available. And then what happens at that point? Does the government step in? Is there some clearinghouse that kind of manages this for commercial or manages it for Medicaid? That's yet to be seen.
So one of the things that was touched on, I think, by all three of you at some point was, this need or a desire to get to how things happen in the real world, right? So what's the real world evidence? How did this, who's using it? Who's it being used for? Did it offset costs elsewhere? But almost by definition, you can't really have real world evidence at the time of launch, where it seems like so much of the initial decision-making, has to be made, and then it's changed my mind. How does one, try to pivot to the real world experience to the point where you can impact a formulary decision or a coverage decision 6 months later, 8 months later, 12 months later, after a launch and a primary, formulary coverage decision or coverage policy has been written? That's a sardonic smile.
That's a $1 million question. Again, I don't want to sound cynical. I think where there's an obvious and critical clinical need for the product, and a payer feels constrained in its ability to limit access, you'll see a positive correlation from that therapy in that situation in the ask for real world evidence. If they have to pay for it, they really want to understand that there's value in it, and there's utility in it, and that there's some rationale to the price point. I mean, if ICER evaluates the product, right, then that could be utilized as well. Where there's potentially clinical interchangeable alternatives, and the plan has more leverage in allowing access or not allowing access, the utility and the impetus for real world evidence seems to go down, right? I think it depends on where the plan is and their their position and their belief on whether they can limit access or not. And then if they have to provide access, then the push for outcomes data, real world evidence gets harder. But they don't have as much opportunity to stop it or to force one-to-one trade-offs on negotiations for rebates, et cetera.
I think
I don't know if that's where you're going with that, but
I think one of the interesting questions too is I think you can answer this question pre-COVID and then now with COVID, because I would, Mark, I pretty much agree with what you've said. And I think real world evidence, I think for maybe certain products, particularly in competitive market, there may be some advantages. But I think more times than not, what I've seen it used is more as a sales aid or a detail, something to detail with. And that's really, it's just another way to engage with a physician or somebody else. But, in light of COVID and what's going on with the vaccines, I mean, we're all sort of participating in this real world experiment on, both effectiveness and safety that I think's absolutely fascinating. And my fear is we'll resort back to the past, but I really hope that, and it's not just on the government. I mean, it's on everybody to hold the government and industry accountable, I think, for moving the system forward and saying, hey, we've had some massive breakthroughs in how we develop, in this case, vaccines, but also treatments, but also how we sort of measure, and in a way that has been safe and effective, and we're monitoring and better understanding that data as we go. And I think, if we can continue to push on that model, I'm all of a sudden becoming, rather than a skeptic, bullish, but I'm skeptical that we could stick with the model.
I think there's definite interest and openness to what we would call value-based pricing for value-based access, right? But getting there requires concessions on both sides, short of a legislative fix. And then if you get to that point, and you have some sort of, we're certainly not advocating an HDA model, but then it has to be sustainable, right, for innovation. So that getting to that compromise, I think, it's a bridge too far today.
Yeah, so one of the questions that just came into the audience, and I think we're kind of working around some of this, so I just want to make sure that we, it's about aligning incentives, right? And I think that you guys are kind of working towards that anyway, and that gets at the topic Doug wanted to come back to around value-based and the guidance from CMS on doing that. But the question is, can real world data help with the aligning in incentives when you get to positive outcomes or positive utility? Are the incentives just too malaligned for us to get there? And it sounds like you're both kind of touching on this a little bit. So let me rephrase. What are the barriers to getting to, so you mentioned sustainability. There's obviously difficulty in getting some of the real world data, far after launch. What are the barriers to getting those incentives aligned based on outcomes or showing utility?
Who's going first?
Well, if we want, we could ask Doug to weigh in. One of the barriers had been the CMS stuff. So, Doug, why don't I let you start off talking about how that barrier is being addressed right now, and we can use that as a springboard.
Right. So let's talk a quick second on that, and talk about where we were in the marketplace, kind of a quick backdrop, and then what CMS did. So CMS, as I mentioned before, has been pushing payers and manufacturers to move away from volume discounts and toward value around outcomes-based contracting, and to kind of reduce the total cost of care. And manufacturers, while they like the idea, have also said, look, in the way best price is calculated, one patient failure can blow up my best price, and then that best price is then made available to Medicaid nationwide. 70 to 80 million people today, right, are in MCOs or fee-for-service programs that could take advantage of pricing that would be at that penny pricing because of that one patient failure. So effective January 1st, 2022, the calculation for best price will be amended to allow manufacturers inside value-based arrangements to use a bundled sale methodology. So you can bundle together that one patient failure with other patient successes and not kind of blow up best price. So it does protect best price. And that's a huge step forward for payers. And what that means to the market from a payer perspective is that, and I maybe have a different view of this based on my previous 4 years work in this space, but VBCs will reduce the risk for payers around new therapies because the market's going to move to the product. If I'm paying $2 million for a therapy and it doesn't work, I expect my money back, right? You buy a car, it comes with 33-year, 36,000-mile warranty, right? You're going to spend that much money. You're expecting this to work. VBCs will also help, and I think the place where they're really going to be effective is high-cost, low-utilization drugs, and it will help ensure durability and treatment outcomes are delivered. From a manufacturer's perspective, value-based contracts offered in the same kind of high cost, offered for high cost drugs or drugs with limited clinical data. I think you can come to market with a VBC and within 6 months or a year have real world evidence that can augment the messaging that goes on for manufacturers in that space to push forward these therapies that come to market early because of breakthrough designation and breakthrough therapy. But at the end of the day, all of this comes down to being able to get to the data that you need to be able to evaluate value-based contracts, right? And then there's confidentiality, there's PHI, right? If you want to bring in more than just medical and pharmacy data, if you want to bring in patient-reported outcomes, which really takes this from 2 dimensions to 3 dimensions, and I think really kind of gets us to a further place where we begin to we're walking and we begin to run on value-based contracting. There's a challenge there with the data and getting that data and having it in formats and having it consistent so that you can get to that data and evaluate that. But that's where I'd like to see the market go.
The value-based or outcomes-based contracting rule from CMS. So it's not final yet, right?
I think the rule is final. The Biden administration had a hold on it, and the hold was released, and so it's my understanding. It should go into effect on 1/1/22. This part of that rule will go into effect 1/1/22.
Oh, I thought it was still frozen.
I think it's been. I think it's.
My understanding is there's been no change on the regulatory freeze, but I'm going to look into that now.
Okay.
If that were to be unfrozen and become effective, my understanding is that, so let's say you are in an outcomes-based contract or a value-based contract with a plan, and if a Medicaid agency were willing to enter into that same construct, then they would gain that benefit. But it still doesn't, it limits the risk, that downside risk of a best price, and it allows you to have multiple best prices. And then the states would have to agree to a similar construct to access that best price. If I understand it at a 60,000 foot level, that could be meaningful. It won't be for every product, right? And every point in its life cycle. And sometimes the interest in those agreements are where there may not even really be, from a suppression perspective, a requirement to do it, right, on a manufacturer's behalf. So it's not a tool for every product, every stage of its life cycle. But if it could create meaningful data, and if it could add more value both to patient access, so patients get access to therapy, manufacturer gets data, and the plan gets a bit more predictability and understanding. I think is a potential win, and if it works, that it provides some downside protection on the best price perspective, and remember, best price is now is 340B, which is I think changed the calculus and the risk. It's not just Medicaid, right? It's 340B, and it's the expansion of 340B in a mail order pharmacy, that also commercial mail order pharmacy with the PBMs, that also makes this a more complicated calculus. But yeah, for sure there's opportunity. I think we need to actually see what actually is implemented, and the structure of that, and then it's going to be different for each product.
And there's also, I think, some downsides to that rule. I mean, there's elements of that rule that I thought were positive breakthroughs. I mean, especially a lot of the anti-kickback stuff definitely needs to be reviewed. But there's also aspects, if I'm correct, on particularly like accumulators and maximizers, that I think are incredibly harmful to patients, especially for more expensive therapies. HIV, I think, is particularly, those patients are at risk. So, and that's sort of the problem, is we continue to build on top of a system that's not really working, and it's just adding one more layer of complexity. And I think, I know there's some pharma companies that were pleased with the rule change, others that weren't. And so to me, I don't know, maybe that's a good sign, but at the end of the day, I think the core of the question is, we have this philosophical divide. That's both a divide between business, but also a divide politically on where we want to be in terms of healthcare. Do we want to be focused on pro-innovation, curing diseases, improving treatments, funneling resources into that? Or do we want to be in this model that's focused on, trying to get best healthcare at lowest cost constantly? And the reality is, like, I think we really need, as a country, to decide which direction we're going to go. I mean, the rumor is, this administration wants to move more towards the path of a German style model, which would sort of empower ICER as sort of pricing czar, which, frankly, I think is hazardous. I think it goes down the path of making the U.S., which is the last country that's sort of pro-medical innovation, moving towards the path of everybody else. And I worry about that. I always tell people, my daughter plays soccer and she wears pink socks in October. And it's not for the best value framework for breast cancer. It's to cure the damn disease, right? And anyway, I'm always going to be pro, like, let's cure stuff, let's fix stuff. And the best money spent, I think, is going to be on medicines that are meaningfully either curing patients or at least helping them live better lives.
There's an interesting question that came through on the Q&A that I would like to just throw out there. It's not something I think we anticipated, so sorry for the curveball, but I think it's an interesting question, so I'll just throw it open to the group. It says, investor question: we're putting millions into small biotechs developing therapies for rare diseases, assuming pharma and biotech will fix market access and reimbursement. Are we right to assume that can happen? I'm paraphrasing. And should investors be getting involved earlier, or how? And it's, again, a little bit of a curveball, but it's a fascinating question, and I wanted to throw it. I mean, my personal belief is that it's a messy topic that will continue to be a messy topic for quite some time, and that it's very hard to discuss the issues of market access and reimbursement as we're trying to do sort of globally, instead of at the particular needs of the of any particular molecule, any particular therapy, or what have you. But I honestly don't know where an investor could get involved, and I'd be curious to see if anybody has a different opinion or would like to speak up.
What I'd say is I'm actually amazed at how much investor capital is going into money or going into companies without this question being answered. And so to me, that actually answers the question of, yes, I actually think the finance community does need to be more involved, because I think there needs to be fresh thinking period on how we think about healthcare finance in the long term. I mean, the way that we fund healthcare today is based off of a model that was designed in the 1940s, and healthcare has changed dramatically since then, and it's going to continue to improve, and we're not set up to finance it that way. So you know, this goes to, how does it fit within our existing structure? Basically, we need smart people to be thinking about solutions in a provocative way, and it's not going to be easy. It's going to be messy. It's going to be political. It's going to challenge the status quo. Insurance companies aren't going to like it. Pharma companies may not like it. Doctors are definitely not going to like it, but people need to be asking these provocative questions. And as an investor, like I said, I'm amazed at how much money I'm seeing going to companies, and it's very unclear what the answer to that question is. I wish I could answer it, because I'd make a lot of money, but I'm not that smart.
I worry quite a bit about the long-term prospects of price and access in the U.S. market. To piggyback a bit on what MACKAY had said, capital is agnostic, and depending on what national statutory regulatory requirements come in, we will either see capital continue to fund innovation. It's a high risk, really high risk market, or that capital will go elsewhere. And when that capital goes elsewhere, to Jim's point, you will see innovation slow down. I mean, it won't stop, right? It won't be, but it will significantly slow down. There will be a lot fewer shots on goal. And today the U.S. is funding, the bulk, or at least a lion's share of that global healthcare innovation dollar. So I worry a lot about that. I think it is gonna be incremental. It is gonna be messy as we sort our way through this. I don't know that ICER is a final solution in all this, because then that what's stopping that from sort of a drop to the bottom where qualities are at $30,000 a year, not $100,000 a year, right? So there's really no philosophical construct that makes it safe for innovation and what feels more sustainable societally. I think as long as the government continues to challenge and put pressure on what they're paying per episode of care, and that trade-off, or that then puts pressure on pricing in the employer market, this urgency is going to continue. And the societal, I see the societal issue, we're a little off topic, is that it's really what patients are paying out of pocket. If we stabilize the patient burden, then it perhaps gives both policymakers in the industry some time to sort this out together. But this idea of insurance has gotten a bit bastardized by the sick paying for the sick.
Well, I mean, we're starting to see this, and we're starting to see it in the growing rift, if you will, between reinsurance companies and payers, which is the payers are selling coverage, while the reinsurance companies are still selling a form of insurance. And so that's where we're starting to see some of that disconnect. I do want to be very, aware of the time. It's 11:43. I know I'm losing some of you at 11:45 East Coast time. So I'm going to try to bring it together. I just want to first thank everybody. I mean, this has been, kind of wide ranging, but I think that's the nature of the beast here, is that there isn't, one set of open questions and answers about these issues, and that framing them without the context of the broader, societal issues or interplay between payer, employer, patient, government is kind of disingenuous, I think. I just want to open it up and see if there's final words from anybody, maybe on, where you see data needs going, or the future of data in trying to drive either prescriber or payer market access and acceptance of therapies.
I'll kick off. I think it's critical and it's important, especially as the industry moves into curative therapies, one time, very high cost therapies, demonstrating that in fact the patient and society gets a durable clinical outcome is foundational. I think it matters for all products. It won't work out for all products, right? Because the value, the data value proposition is not equal, and you have to answer the question. I think sometimes where there's multiple clinical alternatives, the relevance of those data become less meaningful when it's really just becomes more like a normal pricing environment, where you have highly competitive price negotiations. It drops, and in that scenario, where the therapeutic outcomes are well characterized or predictable, spending a lot of money on RWE is less meaningful versus a product that if you have the value proposition that you have a reasonable expectation that if you invest the money over time, that it is going to shift clinical practice and have a real impact on coverage. But those are hard products to come by, right? And they tend to be breakthrough products, and you don't always know. It takes time to figure out which ones are going to hit that designation. So yeah, sure, it matters. I think every situation is different, and it's depending on the molecule and the price access suppression dynamic each molecule runs into in the competitive landscape.
I might disagree with Mark just slightly on the real world evidence. I think that is one of the things that helps payers kind of get over the hump to cover and pay, especially when they can take that real world evidence and then measure the potential cost savings and driving down other healthcare costs, potentially paying for a more expensive drug at the savings to the overall healthcare system, and using that real world evidence to kind of get over that hump. And I think, Neil, kind of my final thought on data really is, when we get to that patient reported outcomes, being able to incorporate that into medical and pharmacy claims, what concerns me is potential confidentiality, PHI, participation by the member. If they're going to report their outcomes and how they're doing, do they become part of the process? Are we compensating them as part of this? If it doesn't work, does some benefit go back to the patient because they were on this therapy instead of a different therapy, right? There's some ethical questions that are buried in there. And I think that's something that we have to consider as we go forward, but we've got to find a way to get there, and security of that data, I think, is critical.
I like that last point a lot, actually. I mean, it's one of the things I think about a lot. There's so much talk about patient centricity in healthcare this day and age, but the patient never gets the financial upside of any of this, right? And so while it's not specific to data, I mean, I think, really mandating greater transparency in the system to uncover a lot of these perverse incentives and the rebate games and stuff like that. And ultimately, like, I agree, like let's let the patient save either in their premiums or in terms of, cash. Either way works for me, but let's let the patient win.
Well, again, you've all been very generous with your time. We're a couple minutes beyond when I was going to lose some of you, so thank you for that. I want to thank all of you for participating, for a great conversation. I want to thank everybody who joined our conversation or who eventually will watch this on the recording for being a part of it. Reminder to everybody that there are a number of other great events happening later today and tomorrow as part of this festival. And tonight will be the cocktail mixology happy hour. So some things to look forward to there. And I want to once again thank all the members of the panel and wish you all a very good day. Oh, yes.
I think it's important to point out that while this was the most exciting panel for today, tomorrow's most exciting panel will be focused around political hot topics, moderated by myself. So just stay tuned for that.
Well, I hate to disagree with you, because I think tomorrow's hot topic is going to be more healthcare data moderated by me. But we'll agree to disagree.
Doug and MACKAY, it was good to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. Have a good day.
Neil. Take care.
Thanks for your presentations and time.